My friend, today I bring you a mystery, a secret embedded in something as simple, as humble, as ordinary as salt. Not gold, not silver, not jewels of the earth, salt. But in the ancient days, salt was worth more than gold. Salt preserved, salt purified, salt healed, and salt transformed. And that's the mystery God is whispering to your soul today. You remember what he said? You are the salt of the earth. That wasn't a poetic phrase or some nice spiritual encouragement. It was a calling, a charge, a command to be something that transforms the very world around you. But there's a moment buried in the story of a young boy in Chicago, a boy named Michael Jordan. Before he became the legend, before the world knew his name, there was a moment when he felt small, defeated. He didn't make the team. He thought it was over. But his mother, filled with wisdom, not from man, but from above, told him, put salt in your shoes. She didn't mean seasoning his food. She meant character. She meant work, faith, commitment, fire in the soul. Salt was her way of saying, you're not done. You're not defeated. You're being seasoned. You see, God is saying the same thing to you. Put salt in your shoes. You've been walking through dry places. You've felt overlooked, underqualified, or just plain tired. But what if that's because you've been walking in shoes without salt? Shoes of doubt, shoes of fear, shoes of complacency. And today the Spirit of the Lord is saying, put salt in your shoes and watch your life transform. Put the salt of discipline in your steps. Let the salt of prayer soak into your walk. Walk in the salt of truth, the salt of righteousness, the salt that keeps you burning when the fire seems to fade. Salt that makes the enemy back up. Salt that declares, I may be walking through the valley, but I'm not walking alone, and I'm not walking in weakness. Because salt doesn't just season, it preserves purpose. Salt carries memory. The offerings of the old covenant, they had to be offered with salt, because salt represented covenant, God's unbreakable promise. So when you walk with salt in your shoes, you're walking in covenant. You're walking in destiny. You're walking in the power of a God who says, what I began in you, I will complete. And don't miss this. Salt is small, yet powerful. Hidden, yet mighty. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to be seen. Just be salt. In your home, be salt. In your workplace, be salt. In the battle that no one else sees, put salt in your shoes and walk it out with power. The world is bland and broken. It's decaying. It's lost its flavor. But God didn't call you to blend in. He called you to preserve it, to bring it back, to be the answer to the rot, the antidote to the decay, the flavor of the kingdom. So this is your moment. The Spirit is moving. The call is going out. And heaven is saying, don't just walk. Don't just run. Don't just fight. Put salt in your shoes today and watch your life transform. And so you walk, but not as you once did. Something's different now. There's weight in your step, but it's not the weight of burdens. It's the weight of purpose. Salt in your shoes gives substance to your journey. It tells the ground you walk on that you're not wandering, you're advancing. Every step becomes a declaration. I know who sent me, and I know why I'm here. You see, salt changes whatever it touches. Drop it in a wound, it stings, but it heals. Place it on food, it flavors and preserves. Scatter it in the soil, it stops weeds from growing. You cannot touch salt and stay the same. And neither can the world touch a child of God filled with salt and stay in darkness. There's a reason why Yeshua, Jesus, said you are the salt. Not you might be, not you can become. You are. That's identity. That's essence. It means you carry something divine, something otherworldly, something the earth can't replicate and the enemy can't counterfeit. The moment you realize this, everything begins to shift. But here's the mystery. Salt is invisible when it's working best. You don't see it in the stew, but you taste the difference. You don't notice it in the soil, but the fruit grows strong. In the temple of God, every offering was salted, but you didn't see the salt in the smoke. And you, God's offering, God's vessel, God's living temple, are called to carry that same invisible power. Not loud, not proud, but potent. So you're walking now, and maybe the road is long. Maybe you're praying and not hearing an answer. Maybe you're sowing and haven't seen the harvest. But listen, when you've got salt in your shoes, delay doesn't mean denial. Silence doesn't mean absence. God is seasoning your journey. He's marinating your faith. He's working behind the curtain. And that's what salt does. It preserves while it prepares. You may feel like you're in a holding pattern, but the salt is doing its work. It's keeping your heart from rotting in bitterness. It's stopping your dreams from decaying in despair. It's keeping your hope from spoiling in the heat of waiting. Salt preserves your soul when everything else tries to eat it alive. Now remember Lot's wife. She turned back, and what did she become? A pillar of salt. At first, that seems like a punishment, but what if it was a revelation? What if God was saying, what you couldn't let go of, you became? The very thing you looked back to, you were consumed by. And the lesson is this: if you don't put salt in your shoes and walk forward, you'll become salt by standing still. You'll be frozen in the past, immobilized in what was, called to be salt on the move. You'll instead be a monument to disobedience. So don't look back. Don't crave Egypt when God is calling you to the promised land. Don't settle for old habits, old fears, old failures. Salt that sits too long clumps and hardens, but salt that moves seasons everything it touches. Some of you have been walking in circles. You've been waiting for a sign, waiting for a door. But God is saying you don't need a new sign. You need new shoes. Salted shoes. Shoes ready for the battle. Shoes that burn with purpose. Shoes that will tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. When the priests carried the ark across the Jordan, it wasn't until their feet touched the water that the river parted. Not before, not halfway, but the moment their feet inside shoes of covenant, touched that flood, the impossible gave way. Your breakthrough is waiting on your step. And your step needs salt. That means walking even when it's dark, walking even when it's lonely, walking when you've been betrayed, walking when the world laughs, because you're not walking for applause, you're walking for obedience. And with every step, heaven echoes, that's my child, that's my warrior, that's my salt in the earth. But don't just walk forward, walk holy. In the ancient world, Roman soldiers carried a pouch of salt. It was part of their wage. It was their reward for faithfulness. That's where we get the word salary. You are a soldier in the army of the Most High, and He has placed a reward in your walk. Salt in your shoes means you don't fight like the world fights. You don't respond like the world responds. You fight with righteousness, with praise, with fasting, with love that breaks chains and turns hearts. And salt speaks of covenant, that eternal agreement between the Creator and His creation. It cannot be broken. The salt covenant is irrevocable. So when you walk with salt in your shoes, you are walking in the promises of Abraham. You are walking in the legacy of the prophets. You are walking in the power of resurrection. You are walking in the authority of one who said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. But let me tell you something. Salt only works if it's pure. The Messiah warned, if the salt loses its flavor, it is good for nothing. So ask yourself, has your salt been diluted? Has the world watered it down? Have fear, doubt, pride, compromise crept in? This is your moment to be refined, to let the Spirit purge you, to let the fire of heaven burn away the impurities, to come back to the altar, to come back to your first love. Because flavorless salt is just white dust. It looks right, but it has no impact. God didn't call you to look holy. He called you to change atmospheres. And how do you restore your saltiness? Not by working harder, but by returning to the source. The mountain where the covenant was spoken, the garden where blood dripped like sweat, the tomb where death lost its grip. You restore your salt by being soaked in His presence, by kneeling in the Word, by walking in intimacy, not routine. And when that salt comes alive again, Watch what happens. Demons will flee, doors will open, dry bones will rattle, generational curses will break, not because you shouted louder, but because you carried salt. You carried substance. Don't underestimate what you're carrying. Elijah poured salt into the bitter waters of Jericho and they were healed. That wasn't magic, that was obedience. That was prophetic action. You have bitter places around you, bitter relationships, bitter memories, bitter disappointments, but God is saying pour salt into them. Not vengeance, not silence, not apathy, salt. Watch me heal what you thought was dead. Because salt is a healer, salt is a purifier. In the ancient temple, salt cleansed the altar, and you are the altar now. So let him salt you. Let him cleanse your motives, your desires, your thoughts. Let him wash your feet like he did the disciples, and then lace up your salted shoes and go. And if you're weary, hear this. Salt strengthens. God told Job, can flavorless food be eaten without salt? The answer is no. In the spirit, flavorless faith is lifeless faith. Some of you are feeding yourselves with the word, but you've lost the taste. You read the scriptures, but they seem dry. That's because they're waiting for salt. Salt is the Holy Spirit illuminating the word, giving it life, making it fire in your bones again. And when the fire comes, the salt ignites. Do you understand what happens when fire hits salt? It pops, it cracks, it purifies, it releases aroma. You were made to burn with the salt. That's what makes your offering holy. So walk differently today. Walk salted. Walk set apart. Walk like the King of Kings put his sandals on your feet and said, now go, child, change the world. Because that's exactly what he did. He chose fishermen, salty, rough, unrefined men, and he said, follow me, I will make you fishers of men. Not by changing who they were, but by seasoning them, empowering them, sending them. That same call is on you now. You're not too young, not too old, not too broken, not too late. Salt doesn't expire, it just waits to be activated. Heaven is handing you the jar. God is saying, open it, pour it, put it in your shoes, walk like you believe. Walk like Jericho is about to fall. Walk like the Red Sea is about to part. Walk like the grave is already empty, because it is. So lace up those salted shoes. Walk into your calling. Walk into your deliverance. Walk into your anointing and never look back. And as you walk, don't be surprised when resistance rises, because salted feet shake foundations. They leave footprints on enemy territory. When you carry salt in your shoes, you become a threat to the kingdom of darkness. You become an agitator to apathy, a disruptor to despair, a spark in places that have known nothing but cold. When you walk salted, you carry a sound. Not always audible to human ears, but heard clearly in the spiritual realm, the sound of covenant, the sound of authority, the sound of a child who knows who they are and whose they are. That sound causes chains to tremble, gates to unlock, and strongholds to fracture. But be warned, salt will also expose. It will show what's decaying. It will reveal where the rot is. It brings clarity. And some around you may not like it. Some may prefer the bland. Some may choose the illusion of sweetness over the truth of preservation. But don't let that deter you. You were not sent to entertain. You were not sent to be liked. You were sent to be salt. And salt cannot apologize for being what it is. In a world that's losing its grip on truth, God is raising up a remnant, not of the polished, not of the perfect, but of the salty. Those who know the pain of the wilderness, who've tasted the dust of rejection, who've wrestled in the night and still chose to walk forward. Those who said, if I perish, but I will not go back. I will not stay silent. I will not lose my flavor. Because salt in your shoes will lead you to places your flesh would never choose. To Nineveh, when you wanted Tarshish. To the wilderness, when you asked for comfort. To the prison, when you thought you'd be in the palace. But every detour with salt becomes divine. every delay becomes destiny. Every disappointment becomes depth. And yes, sometimes salt and shoes will walk you straight into the fire. Like the 3 Hebrew boys, you'll find yourself in a furnace hotter than ever before. But hear this. They walked in bound, but came out free. The fire didn't burn them, it burned what held them. The salt preserved them, and the only thing they lost in the fire was the thing that had them tied. So don't fear the fire. Salt is made for fire. Salt was part of every sacrifice burned on the altar. Salt endures. Salt remains. The fire may rage, but it will not consume you. It will refine you. It will anoint you. It will make you ready for the next step. And that step matters. Because salted feet walk with direction. Not wandering, not guessing, but led. The Spirit doesn't drive you with fear. He leads you with salt. His word is a lamp to your feet, and that light ignites the salt you carry. So wherever your steps fall, whether on mountaintops or through the valley of shadows, you walk in purpose. And every place the sole of your salted foot touches, God says, I will give it to you. There is territory with your name on it, not for your ego, but for His glory. Neighborhoods, families, businesses, ministries, lives, waiting for the touch of salted shoes, waiting for the aroma of the kingdom, waiting for someone bold enough to walk in power, to speak with grace, to live with purity. But don't miss this, salt in your shoes means serving, not just striding. It means stooping low, washing feet, lifting others. It means letting your salt mix with tears as you intercede for those who've lost their way. It means walking into broken places, not to condemn, but to heal. Not to shine a spotlight, but to light a fire. Jesus knelt down and washed the feet of His disciples, knowing full well one would betray Him, another would deny Him, and all would scatter. Still, He salted their feet with love. And He said, now go and do likewise. So put salt in your shoes, but also in your hands, in your words, in your thoughts. Let every part of your life testify of His goodness. And when you begin to live like that, something happens. Salt starts to multiply. Like Elijah's jar of oil, like the loaves and fishes in the hands of the Messiah, what seems small begins to expand. One salted step becomes a testimony. One salted act becomes a chain reaction. One salted conversation becomes a door for healing. You won't always see the impact, but heaven sees. The angels don't celebrate when we build empires. They celebrate when a sinner repents, when a soul returns, when one life is preserved by the salt you carry. So don't despise small beginnings. Salt works in the unseen. You may feel like your prayers are falling flat, like your obedience is going unnoticed, but God is never blind to sacrifice. Every salted step leaves a mark in eternity. And salt teaches you to endure. It trains your spirit. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop striving and start trusting. You walk not by sight, but by faith. And even when the shoes get heavy, even when the tears fall, even when the crowd leaves, you keep walking. Because your steps are ordered, because your soul is seasoned. Salt is not emotional. It doesn't melt when things get hot. It holds, it lasts, it stays. So stay in the fight, stay in the calling. Stay faithful when the world shifts, when trends fade, when culture mocks. Stay salty. Because the end of the age is not bland, it's blazing. The King is coming back, and He's not returning for a tasteless bride. He's returning for one who is bold, refined, radiant, and yes, salty. The bride who said, I didn't wait passively, I didn't coast, I walked, I worked, I warred, I worshiped, I fought the good fight with salt in my shoes. That's who you are. That's what you're called to. Not just to be changed, but to be the change. Not just to be filled, but to be poured out. Not just to survive, but to season the earth with heaven. And if you ever forget, remember the cross. Remember the blood that ran salty with tears and sweat. Remember the feet that walked the hill of Calvary, carrying the weight of your redemption, the same feet that crushed the serpent. the same feet that will one day stand on the Mount of Olives again. And he says, as the Father sent me, so I send you. So be sent. Walk like it, live like it, burn like it, and when you've done all, keep walking, not aimlessly, not fearfully, but filled with the salt of covenant, the salt of calling, the salt of kingdom fire. Let it flavor your destiny. Let it preserve your legacy. Let it transform your every step. And as you continue walking, let this truth burn into your bones. Salted feet do not retreat. Salt doesn't walk backwards. Salt advances. The kingdom of God suffers violence, and the violent take it by force, not with fists, but with faith, not with swords, but with salted obedience. You don't need to shout to shake the ground. Just walk in the Spirit. Just move when He says move. Just show up with salt, and the atmosphere will shift. The enemy fears salted steps. He doesn't fear empty religion. He doesn't flinch at hollow declarations. But when a man or woman wakes up in the morning, slides their feet into salted shoes, and says, "Here I am, Lord, send me," the darkness trembles. Because that's a soul that cannot be bribed, cannot be bought, cannot be silenced. That's a soul that has died to self and come alive in fire. You are not ordinary. Stop walking like you are. Salted shoes are not made for comfort. They are made for conquest. They are not for running away. They are for taking ground, for going back to the enemy's camp and retrieving what was stolen, for marching around Jericho until the walls fall, for stepping into the Red Sea before it parts, for standing on the battlefield when the giant mocks and declaring, "You come with sword and spear, but I come in the name of the Lord." You will be tempted, even in your salted walk, to stop short, to sit down halfway, to say, "This is good enough. I've come far enough. I've done more than most." But hear me, salt left unused becomes useless. You are not given this seasoning to stand still. The salt wasn't poured into your soul to be preserved in a jar on the shelf. It was given to transform every place your feet touch. Some of you are standing at the edge of your breakthrough, but you're too tired to take one more step. You've seen others cross over. You've seen others rise up, and you've wondered, "God, did you forget me?" But the Spirit is whispering today, put salt in your shoes one more time. Just one more step. The shift is closer than you think. One more prayer and the heavens open. One more act of obedience and the chains fall. One more moment of surrender and the river parts. Don't let weariness rob you of your inheritance. Don't let fatigue mute your fire. Salted steps are not powered by adrenaline. They're powered by covenant. And when the road gets long, and it will, remember the walk to Emmaus. 2 disciples walking, hearts broken, dreams shattered. They didn't recognize the one walking beside them, but their salted steps made room for revelation. He opened the scriptures. He broke the bread, and suddenly their eyes were opened. That's what happens when you walk salted. Revelation meets you. Heaven speaks on the road. Understanding breaks in, not when you sit and sulk, but when you keep moving in faith, even if you don't understand, even if all you have is the next step. That's when God meets you. And what about the feet of the messenger? How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Those feet are not clean, not polished, not smooth. They are worn, blistered, torn by the path. But they are beautiful in the eyes of the Lord because they carry salt. They carry gospel. They carry fire. They carry hope to those in despair. You want to see revival? You want to see your city shift, your family redeemed, your nation awakened? Start with salt. Start with your own feet. Let the change begin where you walk. Revival is not always found in a stadium. Sometimes it begins with salted shoes, walking down a hospital hallway, whispering prayers over strangers. Sometimes it's in the grocery store line, offering a word in season. Sometimes it's in your own living room, choosing forgiveness instead of bitterness. This is how the kingdom spreads, one salted step at a time, not in flashes of lightning, but in quiet obedience, in daily dying, in daily walking, in daily remembering that the one who washed your feet now sends you to walk like him. But let's be honest, some of us have been walking with shoes full of dirt, not salt, full of compromise, not consecration. And God, in His mercy, is calling us back, not to shame us, but to restore us, to give us fresh salt, to pour Himself out again until every fiber of our soul is soaked with purpose. It's time to empty your shoes of what doesn't belong, the stones of pride, the dust of distraction, the mud of fear. God is saying, let me clean your feet. Let me refill them with salt. Let me send you again. This is not a one-time anointing. Salt must be reapplied, reawakened, resurrendered. You cannot walk today on yesterday's salt. You need fresh fire, fresh oil, fresh salt for a new season. And what if the salt you carry becomes the healing for someone else's wounds? What if your walk brings someone else to life? What if your obedience becomes the spark that reignites their faith? Salted shoes don't just change your life, they change the lives of those around you. Think of the woman with the alabaster jar. She broke it at His feet. She wept. She poured out everything, and then she walked away different. Because when you kneel at His feet with surrender, He fills your shoes with purpose. She walked in with shame, but walk out with salt. That's the exchange He offers. Your brokenness for His salt. Your past for His presence. Your wandering for His mission. And once you taste it, once you know the flavor of walking in covenant, you'll never go back to the bland again. You were made to preserve what matters, to protect what's holy, to carry a flavor of heaven in a tasteless world. Every step you take with salt in your shoes is a declaration that you belong to another kingdom, that your citizenship is in heaven, that you are not swayed by the tides of culture, not seduced by the glitter of Babylon. You are rooted, anchored, preserved by the salt of God. And now, as the journey continues, understand this: the more salt you carry, the more sacred your walk becomes. Not because of your strength, not because of your name, but because of the one who placed the salt there. He chose you before you even knew how to walk. He called you before you ever heard His name. And the salt in your shoes is proof that His fingerprints are still on your destiny. You see, salt doesn't just season food, it seasons time. It marks moments, it transforms the ordinary into the holy. When you walk salted, your Tuesday morning becomes a battlefield. Your quiet commute becomes intercession. Your whispers in the night become weapons of war. The place where you stand becomes holy ground, because the salt declares that God is here. And yes, there will be days when your feet bleed, days when the path feels uphill and unseen, days when the enemy whispers that it's not worth it, that nobody notices, that nothing is changing. But he is a liar, because salted steps always leave a trail. You may not see the fruit today, but seeds are being planted with every move of your obedience. Think of Ruth, a foreigner, a widow, broken, overlooked, and yet she walked behind the reaper step after step, gathering what others left behind. She didn't know her salted steps in that dusty field were leading her into a divine lineage. She didn't know she was walking into the bloodline of the Messiah. But God knew, and He knows your field, He knows your walk, and He is not unjust to forget the labor of salted love you've shown in His name. Do not despise your portion. Do not curse your current step. The salt in your shoes is working in silence. It's preserving the promise. It's protecting the seed. It's sanctifying the journey. And hear me now, salt isn't just for flavor. It's also for fire. Salt was commanded to be used in every offering by fire in the Old Covenant. That means you don't walk away from the fire. You walk through it. You don't avoid the refining. You welcome it, because you know that the fire that doesn't destroy you is the fire that defines you. The enemy wants you to associate fire with failure. But God says fire is where I meet you. Fire is where I mark you. Fire is where salt becomes pure. So if you're in the fire, rejoice. You're not being burned, you're being branded. You're being seasoned for more. And when you come out, your walk will carry a fragrance of heaven. The world is desperate for that kind of walk. Not loud, not showy, not self-absorbed, but salty, authentic, clean, set apart. A walk that refuses to compromise. A walk that brings conviction without a single word. A walk that breaks chains simply by being near. That is your call. That is your legacy. That's the reason he told you, you are the salt of the earth. And remember, salt never apologizes for its presence. It doesn't ask permission to change the flavor. It doesn't beg to be accepted. It simply exists. It does what it was made to do. And you must do the same. Be who he called you to be. Stand where he planted you. Walk where he sends you. Don't try to dilute your salt to fit in. The moment salt is compromised, it loses its purpose. You were not made to blend in with the bland. You were made to be distinct, to carry something the world cannot manufacture and the devil cannot counterfeit. And in the places where you've grown weary, where your steps have faltered, where your fire has dimmed, he says again, put salt in your shoes. Let me remind you of who you are. Let me rekindle the spark. Let me strengthen your ankles for the climb ahead. For there is still more land to take, still more souls to reach, still more battles to win. The time is short and the hour is urgent. The fields are white for harvest, but the laborers must walk salted, not bitter, not boastful, not weary, but salty, alert, awake, anointed, walking in truth when the world walks in confusion, walking in love when the world walks in division, walking in purity when the world walks in pollution. And yes, it will cost you. Salt always costs. In the Old Covenant, it was precious, it was guarded, it was honored, and so must your walk be. Guard the salt. Protect the purity. Do not trade it for comfort or applause. Do not cheapen it for ease. Do not lay it down for anything less than glory. Because when you walk salted, you are walking with a promise beneath your feet. The promise that no weapon formed against you will prosper. The promise that he goes before you, that he walks beside you, and that his glory is your rear guard. The promise that though you walk through the valley, you will fear no evil. For the salt in your shoes declares you are not alone. Even the dust you shake off your feet will testify. Even your footsteps in forgotten places will leave marks in the spirit. You are not walking for man. You are walking for the one who walked the hill of Golgotha, barefoot and bleeding, to salt the earth with his own sacrifice. And the earth still bears the imprint of those holy feet. And now he calls you to follow, not with hesitation, but with boldness. Not with pride, but with purpose. Not for applause, but for eternity. So get up again, put salt in your shoes again. Let the enemy see that you're still walking, that the fire didn't stop you, that the betrayal didn't break you, that the silence didn't steal your faith. Let every step you take ring like thunder in the spiritual realm. Because the king is not finished with you yet. The scroll is still being written. The journey is still unfolding. And the salt in your shoes is only just beginning to release its power. Keep walking, keep burning, keep salting the earth. And so you walk step by step, salted, sealed, and sanctified. Every step now is not just a movement, it's a statement, a decree, a prophetic act. Because salt in your shoes means you no longer walk for survival, you walk with assignment. You no longer walk as a slave, you walk as a son, as a daughter, an heir of the kingdom. The dust of the world may still cling to your ankles, but it cannot seep into the salt. You walk now with a different stride, a different weight, not burden, but glory. And that weight will cost you. Glory always costs. The presence of God cannot be carried lightly. The salt in your shoes is not for show. It is a sign that the fire has touched your life and left you marked. There's no room anymore for casual steps, no room for lukewarm feet. The salted walk is precise, strategic, carried by grace, but fueled by conviction. You cannot claim to carry the salt and tread paths of compromise. You cannot cry out for revival with shoes still rooted in rebellion. The salted walk is a narrow one, not because God is restrictive, but because his path is holy, because his glory is not for sale. But that narrow walk, it leads to wide places, to broad horizons, to deep wells of joy and strength and unshakable peace. Salt may cost you the crowd, but it gives you the cloud, the presence of God that goes before you like fire by night and light by day. And once you've walked in that presence, you'll never crave the empty echo of man's applause again. And what happens when your salted walk meets someone else's wilderness? When your steps lead you into someone else's famine, someone else's valley, then, child of God, you become the miracle. The answer to a prayer they were too weary to speak. You become the one who brings the word, not just with your mouth, but with your walk. Salt doesn't need a pulpit. It doesn't need a title. It just needs to be present. And if it's in your shoes, then it's in your conversation, your attitude, your reactions, your presence. People can taste the kingdom on your life without you ever quoting a verse. They feel it in how you listen. They sense it in how you carry peace into chaos, mercy into offense, humility into prideful room. You don't need to strive to impress. Salt doesn't try. It just is. It transforms by existing, and so must you. Live salted, speak salted, love salted, forgive salted, and even when your heart is breaking, even when you're limping, if the salt is still there, you're still walking right. There is something powerful about limping with salt. It says, yes, I've been wounded, but I didn't stop. Yes, I've been crushed, but not destroyed. That limp is holy. That limp is a scar of endurance, proof that even through the night season you kept moving. Jacob walked away from his encounter with God, forever marked in his body, but he walked away with a new name. Some of you are being renamed. You've walked too long as the wounded, the forgotten, the rejected, but the salt in your shoes is crying out, that's not who you are. You're not a mistake. You're not your past. You're not your failure. You are chosen. You are redeemed. You are called to carry the fire. And if God put the salt in your shoes, then nothing, no demon, no failure, no storm can take it out unless you lay it down. So don't let your delay turn into defeat. Don't let your pain convince you that the promise has expired. It hasn't. It's only getting seasoned. You're being aged like fine wine, pressed like pure oil, refined like silver. And all the while, your steps are becoming more and more aligned with the rhythm of heaven. Salt in your shoes won't always make you faster, but it will make you faithful. The salted walk doesn't rush. It's steady, patient, anchored. It doesn't leap at every opportunity or panic in every storm. It discerns, it waits, it listens, and then it moves with the authority of one who knows the shepherd's voice. And when the salted walk meets opposition, it doesn't shrink, because it knows opposition is often the confirmation. Goliath showed up not to stop David, but to reveal him. Pharaoh didn't harden his heart to crush Moses, but to usher in deliverance. So when resistance rises, let the salt rise too. Let your prayers intensify. Let your worship go deeper. Let your steps grow louder in the Spirit. Because salted shoes carry sound. They carry the sound of faith, the sound of history shifting, the sound of heaven invading. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, you'll look back. You'll trace the salted path you walked. You'll see the footprints left in places you thought had no purpose. You'll realize every delay, every detour, every desert was preparing you. God wastes nothing. Not your tears, not your silence, not even your missteps. He redeems it all. And if you return to him, he'll salt your shoes again. He'll send you back into the field, not in shame, but in power. That's the power of grace. That's the mystery of salt. It turns weak things into weapons. It turns broken vessels into burning lamps. It takes the outcast, the overlooked, the overrun, and makes them overcomers. And now, as the sound of heaven grows louder in this hour, the Spirit is calling for movement, not just noise, not just programs, movement. Salted feet on the ground, sons and daughters on the front lines, priests and prophets walking not in popularity, but in purity. This world doesn't need more opinions, it needs salt. It needs those who walk with fire in their bones and truth in their steps, who carry revival like a seed in their stride, who aren't impressed by platforms, but are consumed with presence. This is your moment. You weren't born in this generation by accident. You were chosen to carry salt in an age of decay. You were sent to preserve what matters, to illuminate what's dark, to restore what's broken. The salt in your shoes isn't a nice metaphor. It's a mantle, and it rests on you now. So get up again, walk again, not like you did yesterday, but with fresh oil, with renewed fire, with refined salt. Keep walking, child of God. So now the call is clear and the hour is here. Put salt in your shoes, not just as a symbol, but as a surrender. Let it flavor your faith, preserve your purpose, refine your character, and empower your walk. This isn't about feeling ready, it's about being willing. It's about letting heaven fill your steps with something the world cannot explain and hell cannot withstand. Don't wait for a sign, you already have a command. Walk salty, but walk steady, walk strong. And as you go, heaven will back every step. The earth will feel the echo. And your life will be a living testimony that when God salts your shoes, nothing stays the same. Not the path, not the people, not even you. Now go, walk it out, watch him move, and never ever walk bland again.